At this point, I would like to invite Mr. Ravindran Devangunam. He's the Director of Retail and Wholesale, NKEA, and I suppose he could give some of the government's perspective and what the government could do, or we'll also be interested to get your feedback on how else the government can help us. Mic for him. We've talked a lot about, moving abroad. Ravi, why are there so few international Malaysian brands out there that's really globally recognized?
I think that's something that we actually discussed just before the forum this morning. One of the things that we found, and for the last 3 years, we've been focusing on the infrastructure side. And as you said, Noelle, the retail or the domestic consumption has actually grown quite phenomenally. And if you look at our GDP, close to 70% of our GDP is driven by domestic consumption. So from the government standpoint, the stronger the domestic consumption, the better it is for the economy. And it's more sustainable because we are not affected by externalities, right? So that's one approach that we've taken, and we've also looked at the infrastructure side, which is, getting the large format stores to grow, to plant up, to get more malls to be built, and we've been talking to some of the retailers, and we've actually got an initiative called the Foreign Brand Acquisition. Because when we sat in the lab with some of the retailers, they didn't, of course, we didn't have some of these guys in the lab.
Why not? I would imagine,
the
two most important brands in the country.
Actually, to be honest, when the labs happened, there was a competition between the wholesale retail side and the tourism side to grab Royal Selangor. So Royal Selangor chose the tourism side, right? While we did syndicate with them, but a lot of the brands or retailers who did attend did not feel confident that we actually had a strong Malaysian branding. So they then said, why not? So this came from the private sector, yeah? They then said, why not try foreign brand acquisition so that we can expand our capabilities with that foreign brand. My team and I have always been, arguing or trying to contemplate, why is it we don't have the homegrown Malaysian brands? Where are they, right? How can we actually help them? So what we've decided now is, following this series, we'd like to have a series of dialogue, right? One of the things that we are thinking about is to segment the various brands and maybe come up with 2 clusters, right? I don't think it's trying to be too ambitious and going for a large number of these brands, but maybe 3 to 5 major brands like Royal Selangor, like BritishIndia, maybe 1 or 2 more, and then maybe another cluster which is slightly lower, right? And try and chart out where they can be over the next 2.5 years. What can government do to step in? Is it in the form of funds? And I think you asked the classic question of, what's the role of our ambassadors, right? One of the things that we were trying to do, and one of the initiatives we have, is the One Malaysia Mall, right? We've been trying to engage with our embassies overseas. I've had first-hand experience trying to deal through the embassy, right, in some of these economies, where we were trying to encourage some of our mall operators to go overseas, right? But I think you're right. It's easier to approach a capital land from Singapore than to approach one of our homegrown mall operators to go overseas.
And why is that? Is it risk aversion?
Absolute risk aversion. While Capital Land, and Capital Land, by the way, has approached us to be one of our EPP players to expand the One Malaysia Mall concept. And we've been holding back for the last 1 year saying, hold on, you're a Singapore player.
It sounds like PEMANDU is also risk averse.
Right? But the issue is, when I compared the Capital Land, for example, and some of our mall operators, we actually brought a number of opportunities to the table. And we brought some of these opportunities from overseas to come and visit some of our operators here. We found that our operators were pretty much fly-by-night, right? They want to hit and run and disappear. So basically, they're looking for a 2-year return. It's like a property play, right? If there are no housing opportunities, we don't want it. We want a 2-year return, and we want to get out. As opposed to Capital Land, for example, and classic economy is India, right? Growing economy, right? And they've now recently had liberalization in the retail sector, right? We've just not been able to entice any one of our mall players to enter that space.
And what's driving this risk aversion? Is it access to capital? They're afraid that capital will dry up, and that's why they don't want to sink in that money to have that longer term vision?
I don't think it's access to capital. I think it's the mindset that they have. So if you look at every mall that's opening up in Malaysia, it typically comes with some housing and various other office space and so on, right? They make a quick return on that versus the actual retail space, right? Retail space returns are much longer, right? So they are used to that, as opposed to the thinking of a Capital Land where they go in long term. And lo and behold, Capital Land has got 16 to 18 malls all across India. We can't have even one.
In the case of Capital Land, because it's like a GLC in Singapore, it could be partly also because they have politicians and policymakers who give them the kind of support that they need to just go abroad, whether it's G2G discussions. Is that maybe perhaps lacking in our country?
Possibly. We've been engaging with some of the GLCs, right? I won't name them, but we have engaged some of them, and it's been slow. It's been very slow in terms of trying to entice them, right?
Even GLCs in Malaysia.
Even GLCs.
Just one thing on this. Kaplan can go aggressive in China because they dominate the Singapore mall scene, right?
Yeah.
You can't open a store in Singapore without being a CapitaLand tenant. It's just, you run out of malls to open. So they have huge experience in having been mall operators and developers. And actually, Malaysia is unusual that we don't have that sort. A lot of the malls are run by separate companies. They have experience doing 1 or 2 malls. And I think they may see there's a lot of scope for them to still grow in Malaysia before they go outside. And I'll be a bit nervous as well as if we push them too quickly, because not all our mall operators are necessarily that good at doing it, and may need a bit more time to get it right here. So Singapore's a very unusual case where the Kaplan it was so dominant as a mall operator that they owned so many malls before they went to China.
I agree.
Well, in the case of Capital Land, now that relations with Singapore have improved substantially under the current Prime Minister, so maybe it's possible there will be a Malaysian GLC that would tie up Capital Land and then they go abroad. Would that be one name that comes to mind is Khazanah, one of their subsidiaries?
We're actually working on that right now, trying to get the Malaysian side to start thinking in those lines. You're right, given that the 2 Prime Ministers get along, I think it actually helps. So that's one area that we're looking at. The other area that we are concerned is the branding, right? The Malaysian, the homegrown Malaysian brand. We have had individuals who've come in with proposals, right? But put it this way, I've not found a wow proposal. I mean,
What is the root of the problem? Is it just lack of talent? What is it? Just attitude?
I think it's attitude. It's attitude in a sense, because most of them come in and say, well, you owe it to me, right? You got to give me this. You said that the ETP is all about, inclusiveness and sustainability, more money, right? So you owe it to me, right? We're fine. We say, oh, great. Tell us what you want, right? Or how you want it, or what's your vision. And then you find that, it's a sinkhole, right? There is not much there, right? Which is why my team and I then stepped back. We said, maybe it's time to just engage the existing brands, right? Rather than create something new. Right? Engage the existing brands and see how we can help them. For example, as you said, that it's not been easy accessing through our embassies. Maybe there's a way we can rebuild the Matrade, Meeties, the actual embassy staff actually have a retailer, associated with certain countries, right? Based in the embassy that our retailers can actually approach and access. Maybe build that network, one. Two, possibility of having kind of like a venture fund, right? Although I know you're not keen on giving up your equity at this point.
It's not mine to give.
But you make the decision.
But maybe come up with something like a venture fund.
In a way, Equinas is playing that role, right? Equinas and maybe to some extent PNB, they've been acquiring retail brands or developing their own consumer brands. Do you see that maybe the GLIC type funds could play a role?
Possibly.
You have a view about GLCs being involved in the retail brand, or GLCs, bringing the GLCs and getting them involved?
No, I think you need to develop expertise. If it is a sector that you're going to focus on, then you have to build a team. So within that GLIC, you develop retail expertise, and then you can build this as part of the portfolio. But if it's not identified as one of the priorities, there's a lot on their plate, and then you're going to have very poor execution when they try to dabble in something like retail.
Yeah, I think one of the things that as I hear the conversations go, one of the items that perhaps is not called out upon is before we expand, before we want to run, let's know how to walk. Are we confident that we can execute world-class standard within Malaysia? Because when you go beyond that, whatever works now may work overseas, but whatever you have issues with will be propagated across, right? So a lot, same with the malls, same with retail brands. I think that is something which is a given. So when you say that proposals perhaps were not up to scratch, then it's more a reflection of the capabilities of our current industry, of what we are able to execute and achieve.
So if both of you were to sit in this lab where Ravi is going to create, where talk to some of the brands that have already evolved slightly, what would you, I wouldn't say ask for, but what would you suggest to, say, Ravi and his team?
So if you think about the race to the finish line and you have various players at different parts of the race, I would urge for you to focus on those closer to the finish line. That's not because that will get you the bang for the buck. For those brands that will get past the finish line, they can be your case stories and inspiration to those who are still in the race and kind of bring them on board. And that's the kind of an organic growth of acceleration. I think there are a lot of things like, say, leveling, say, our overhead constraints, right? Our base is small. What are the things that we retailers need to spend on to kind of grow and develop our brand? Things like information technology, those are very expensive. Intellectual property rights, right? Protection of that worldwide, extremely expensive too. And at the same time, also talent remains an issue. So if you think about, say for example, I'm going to say Singapore, because they do, what I understand, they do have incentives for some of those elements to kind of assist their brands to grow without having that burden on their overhead.
And looking at the Singapore example, they've started something called Design Singapore, where they try to get more young people, especially young entrepreneurs, to get interested in design kind of businesses. And also, they've also tried to create like Singapore sort of gifts, either in the form of teas or in various forms. I think even the orchid. I think there's an orchid kind of gift that they've created. And so, do you think Malaysia should get into that kind of space, or they should just let the market grow organically?
I think Malaysia, we kind of take a bipolar approach.
Bipolar.
Right? Sometimes
what
it
would
is.
that really mean?
Sometimes it is. We allow the market to grow on its own, and then suddenly we wake up and we say, "Oh, we got to do something." Then we do it, but then we end up not doing it right. So that's what I meant by bipolar, right? If we're going to do something like that, then I think it has to be in consultation with industry players, right? In terms of where we can actually help them. I don't think we want to go in and replicate Singapore right now. I don't think that's what we want to do. But I think we need to figure out exactly where we can insert ourselves in order to give the maximum bang for the buck. So that's an area that I think we need to focus on. Working with these guys and say, where can we insert ourselves? How do we bring that talent, or how do we enhance your talent base? You tell us, because we don't know what talent you want, right? Or we don't know how to create that. You tell us. And then we'll go back through the supply chain and try and figure out where we can start picking out pieces. Because I think Rhoda is absolutely right. We need to look at the couple that are the low-hanging fruit that we can take to the finish line quickly and then sing their praises, right? So I think identify a few winners and then work backwards.
This issue about risk aversion, because I think this is the thing that's going to hold Malaysian brands or Malaysian mall operators back. And I've been thinking about what causes this risk aversion. And when I speak to like SME owners, because they are the drivers of the economy apart from the oil and gas players. And with the recent political situation after the elections, and it's a lot of racial kind of talk, right? And when you talk to some Chinese businessmen, and when I look at the list of FMM, the Federation of Manufacturing Malaysia, and which your uncle is a president, FMM, and
there's no lobbying there. Okay?
Yeah. So he's the president there, and more than 50%, or easily more than 60% of the members there are Chinese run or Chinese owned. I think you cannot deny the fact. You just look at the list; it's all almost Chinese. So, and then with all this racial talk, I know PEMANDU cannot solve everything, but with this kind of racial talk, it doesn't help business sentiment. Because as a Chinese owner, you would think, okay, I'm going to put my children up overseas and make sure they're well taken care of, and then I'll just still run my business, but I'm not really going to invest. I'm not really going to sink my roots because I'm going to retire as far as I'm concerned. Maybe if I can get a view of the private sector, you came back and your business,
I don't think this was on the list of questions that Noelle sent. Ambushed here on stage. I don't think this thing is pushing people to go out faster. I don't think we're going to go, because of the dangers here, I think we better build our businesses abroad as a retailer.
Maybe you're just like, well, why do I bother to invest? I'm going to retire, my children are well taken care of.
Yeah, so I think the first point you asked about risk aversion, I think I just want to address that. Risk aversion is not an unnatural thing if you're small. So I would really strongly recommend that you get some scale before you start taking bets in other markets. And that's something we have to be very conscious of when we pick our winners and build them up, that they need to have a critical mass before they really go out there, because you can lose a lot of money in other markets when you go in. Second point on this, do we take a long-term view if you're a Chinese Malaysian and you're like, what's the future here? I think that will be personal opinions. In our case, our business, our history, our heritage is very tied to Malaysia. Even as we build businesses abroad, we certainly know this is our home market. And it's funny, you know, we opened our Singapore office after 1969 because we said, hey, what's going to happen after these riots? And maybe we have to hedge our bets. But over the years, I think we've really concentrated, and we said Malaysia is our future. It is where we employ most of our employees. And I think this is where we're going to continue to invest. For someone starting out today, I think Malaysia still provides a lot of opportunities. You know, if you ask a mall operator, go open a mall somewhere else, they'll say, I'd rather do it here in Malaysia where I have the access, I have the assets, I have the intangibles, and they can very easily grow compared to going abroad. So I think the sentiment has to be very, very negative before a lot of people in business would take a negative view on that.
The truth is, it did not cross my mind that would be a holding back of where we want to invest, because at the end of the day, British India's outlook is always one that we are an international player and we are looking at markets individually. We happen to have our headquarters in Malaysia, where all of the 50 of my design team sits, right? As for me coming back, I think like while I was in the US over 6 years, I have been following what has been going on back at home. And I actually am very encouraged by the type of steps that are being taken. Maybe they don't always work the way that we want them to work, but I think the intent is there and the direction is right. And I think that's what you just have to anchor on and keep on moving forward.
And just one thing, I think the lucky thing about being in retail or being in a consumer business is that your fortunes are not too dependent on whoever's in power the day. And I think that keeps us on the sidelines without having to worry. I don't think if we were listed, I don't think our share prices would take a hit if there was a change in government or anything, because if you're a consumer business, you're not dependent on those relationships and you're not dependent on large contracts. I think, and that is a very appealing thing to be doing in Malaysia, where you have to, I think, enjoy the fact that you are not beholden to those situations.
Just very quickly, at least from the PEMANDU standpoint, right? We're looking to generate as much business, as much GNI per capita before the year 2020, and possibly before that, right? We are completely colorblind, right? We stick by what Dr. Sri Idris says. It is more money for everyone, right? And it has to be sustainable. So basically, we just work through where the opportunities are, and we try and facilitate whoever has got the right business proposal, and we facilitate it through. So as far as we are concerned, we are there for everyone. And whatever rhetoric the country may be going through right now, we don't pay any heed to it.
Thank you all for your participation.